deadly attack just days before Ukraine's presidential elections. We're tracking the turmoil tonight. Restoring Christian unity, the religious leader who's talking about Catholic-Orthodox relations. Building a great society, a look back at LBJ's vision 50 years after his famous speech. How does it mesh with Catholic teaching? And the power of music, how some professional musicians are helping students make a difference. Those stories and more coming up on EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, May 22nd, 2014. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. We begin with news now. The Archdiocese of Chicago is announcing the search is now underway for a successor to Cardinal Francis George. That announcement comes after a meeting between the papal nuncio and Cardinal George. The Archdiocese says the search for Chicago's next archbishop should wrap up by late fall. We don't know yet when the new archbishop will assume his duties in Chicago. Cardinal George has suffered a series of health problems, including kidney cancer. Now, some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. It is the deadliest raid by pro-Russia gunmen so far. Insurgents have killed at least 13 troops at the military checkpoint in eastern Ukraine. The insurgents showed journalists the cache of weapons they took in the raid. But the group also says one of their own fighters was killed during the struggle. Those attacks come just days before this weekend's presidential elections in Ukraine. And tonight, the streets of Bangkok, Thailand are virtually deserted after a military takeover and a nationwide curfew. Earlier today, the Army chief announced the suspension of that country's constitution and the dissolution of its government. Our Wyatt Goolsby joins us now with the latest on the coup in Thailand. Wyatt?
Brian, so far this has not been a violent takeover, but for months, Thailand's military has feared widespread street protests would trigger fighting. Today, the military took matters into their own hands and announced on national television they're taking control.
Firstly, the Constitution of the Kingdom of Thailand 2007 is suspended, except Article 2, regarding the monarchy. Secondly, the caretaker cabinet is ordered to cease their duties.
And with that, Thailand's government is no more. On Thursday, a military commission announced a takeover. Almost all national broadcasting stations are suspended and international stations have been blocked. The streets are nearly empty tonight and all schools are closed until Monday. Why? Because the Army chief says a coup was needed to resolve a political crisis. Soldiers have been breaking up two rival camps of protesters, the pro-government ones known as red shirts and anti-government ralliers known as yellow shirts.
I'm sad that we haven't yet achieved as much as we wanted. We thought we would go home only after we got what we wanted, reform, before election. But I also wanted the military to come out. If they hadn't come out, we'd have been in a bad situation because the other side has so many weapons.
The Army declared martial law on Tuesday. That's in response to last week when grenades were fired at an anti-government protest site in Bangkok that left 3 people dead and more than 20 injured. Forced meetings between political rivals have failed to break the deadlock. For the people, political instability has become a norm in the last 7 years.
It's the same old thing. They've done this 17 or 18 times. If you ask me, I would say the Army has eventually chosen the stupidest solution.
I feel better that everything will be back in order. People, both red shirt and yellow shirt, will go home, then we can go back to work normally and everything will fall back into place. I think that's how it'll probably go.
Military leaders are asking the public not to panic and to carry on their lives normally so they can, quote, quickly bring the situation back to normal. But Brian, it seems like that's pretty difficult to imagine for the people there right now.
Well, at least there hasn't been violence yet. Thank you, Wyatt. Here in Washington, lawmakers on the Hill are taking on spy agencies' handling of your private information. They passed a bill that would put an end to the National Security Agency's bulk collection of American phone records. The vote comes after last year's revelations by leaker Edward Snowden about the sweeping nature of that collection program. Critics say the bill doesn't go far enough. It forces the phone companies, though, to keep records for 18 months and allows the NSA to access that information only after getting a court order. The FBI has just wrapped up an investigation into a possible security breach at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. There was concern about whether a worker helped an inmate communicate with the outside world. But a Justice Department spokesman now says he's clear there won't be any filing of charges. The worker was representing the inmate on his defense team, so court proceedings were put on hold during that FBI probe. Now those proceedings will move forward. A California man is in custody after police say he drugged his girlfriend's teenage daughter and took her and held her captive for 10 years. During that time, authorities say Ysidro Garcia forced the teen to marry him and have his child under a false identity. Neighbors say they didn't suspect a thing.
It's hard to believe because he seemed like a nice guy. He looks like a nice guy from what we see. From everybody here in the apartment, we know him as a nice guy, hardworking guy, we don't know him as an aggressive person or nothing.
And now 25-year-old woman has found courage to escape after talking to her sister on Facebook. Hurricane season is on the horizon, but meteorologists say it shouldn't be quite as bad. This year, the scientists announced today the season should be more on the mild side because of the weather phenomenon known as El Nino. But they pointed out it only takes one storm to cause havoc, and people still need to be prepared.
Have a plan. Know what it is you're going to take. And you need to leave. There is not one of us that can withstand the surge and protect their house when it is under attack by nature. You cannot put first responders' lives at risk because you choose not to evacuate. Know where you need to go, know when you need to go, and go.
The 2014 hurricane season begins June 1st. President Obama has signed off on a proclamation that turns 500,000 acres of desert into a national monument. New Mexico's Organ Mountains Desert Peak sits along the U.S.-Mexico border. The president's action was meant to protect the wilderness area, but he was criticized by some for bypassing Congress. Other lawmakers say the move or see it as a threat to security in the border region, but U.S. Customs officials say the designation will not limit their security efforts. Tonight, we remember an ambitious vision by a U.S. president from 50 years ago. Lyndon Johnson wanted to change America and build what he called a great society. EWTN News Nightly's Jason Calvi joins us now with that story. Jason?
Brian, I was born after the birth of LBJ's so-called Great Society, but we've all lived with results. Programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and welfare.
May 22, 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson called for a great society.
For in your time, we have the opportunity to move not only toward the rich society and the powerful society, but upward to the great society. The great society rests on abundance and liberty for all. It demands an end to poverty and racial injustice.
LBJ's Great Society began at this University of Michigan graduation. 50 years later, conservatives and liberals can agree American life was changed.
It was the first time that the federal government stepped up to the issue of poverty in a really comprehensive way.
So I think it really did usher in this era of big government.
And debate continues on whether President Johnson's war on poverty programs worked.
We've spent $22 trillion on what is today roughly 80 federally funded, means-tested welfare programs, and yet our poverty rate has remained virtually unchanged.
The big victory in the war on poverty, of course, was poverty among seniors. Before the 60s, seniors were the most poor part of the American society. Seniors now are doing fairly well.
American Enterprise Institute's Nick Eberstadt says 3 tragedies of the Great Society are welfare dependence, flight from work, and family breakdown.
Clearly, these patterns have been financed by our welfare state.
Brookings Institution's Elaine Kmark agrees that the breakdown of the family is a major problem, but
I don't see that as a result of the Great Society, which is what they seem to be making the link to.
And Dr. Nicholas Eberstadt added that the civil rights work of the Great Society really helped end legalized racial discrimination. But no matter where you stand on the lasting legacy of the Great Society's war on poverty, President Johnson himself said 50 years ago that the Great Society is not a final objective or a finished work. Brian?
All right, we're joined by Dr. Patrick Dineen. We're joined by Dr. Patrick Dineen, a professor of political science at the University of Notre Dame. Professor Dineen, good to have you back with us.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, I was a young boy in 1964 when LBJ's speech outlined his proposal for a great society. I wonder if you could look at some of the benefits of that proposal and where that's gone over the past 50 years.
Well, the speech itself doesn't lay out any specifics. It was really an effort to articulate a vision of what American society should look like moving forward in the 20th century. But of the proposals that were eventually passed based on LBJ's vision, I think today we can say with some confidence that his efforts to address discrimination, particularly where it existed against African Americans, especially in the South, but not only in the South, is one of the resounding successes of the Great Society proposals. And I think today we can also say with some confidence that some programs such as Medicare that helped keep especially the elderly out of conditions of poverty and with minimal opportunities to have health and wellness in their later years has been one of the successes of the Great Society.
All right, let's work in the principle of subsidiarity. Are these things best handled at the national level, or is the local level preferred?
If you look back at LBJ's speech, this is one of the lines that he delivered. He said that the solution to these problems does not rest on a massive program in Washington, that there is a need, he said, for a creative federalism between the national capital and the leaders of local communities. And it seems to me in lines like that, often lost today in our political debates, LBJ articulates a certain kind of understanding, or at least articulation, of Catholic social teaching. On the one hand, arguing for solidarity, particularly with the poor and the marginalized and those who are not well off, who can use the assistance of others, but also stressed a value of subsidiarity, that where problems can be dealt with at a more local level, one is more likely to have success because one is more likely to have the commitment and energies of people in those communities. So I think we could say that in hindsight, that efforts to combat discrimination where they existed at that time probably had to be vested in the federal government because of resistance at the local level. We can also look back and say that in many cases, the programs, many of the anti-poverty programs, what was called the War on Poverty, ended up having to be discontinued by the 1970s because they proved to be disastrously ineffective. As Ronald Reagan once quipped, he said, we have waged a war on poverty and poverty won. And so I think we ought to gauge and evaluate the kinds of proposals and programs based on whether or not we think that solidarity demands that they should be addressed and whether subsidiarity demands that they can be addressed more fully and better at a more local level.
And very quickly, as one who has really studied this, what types of programs do you think look better at the local level, would work better?
Well, I think one always has to evaluate these at a close policy level. But I think that certainly when we're dealing with issues of anti-poverty, that we see in particular a lot of effectiveness at the level of civil society, that poverty is often redressed best by voluntary associations at the level of civil society. This is not to say that there's not a place for the federal government to give aid and assistance, but perhaps this return to the idea of what LBJ proposed as a creative federalism, a phrase that I would love to see used by any party today on Capitol Hill, would be a really great way to begin thinking about reintroducing these ideas of solidarity and subsidiarity into our national conversation.
All right, Dr. Patrick Dineen joining us from the University of Notre Dame's Political Science Department. Professor Dineen, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Coming up, we're on the ground in Jerusalem tonight. A look at what's going on ahead of the Pope's Holy Land pilgrimage. And a first in Korea, the historic decision by a prince of the church there. You're watching EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, May 22nd. I'm Brian Patrick, and we have special coverage ahead of the Pope's pilgrimage to the Holy Land this weekend. Let's go now to Alan Holdren, who's on the ground with our EWTN News Nightly team in Jerusalem. Alan, what should we expect from this visit?
Well, Brian, the theme of this trip is unity. And today here in Jerusalem, we caught up to a Catholic leader who has a personal experience of reconciliation within the Catholic Church. And this is what he said.
I hope all the hearts should be opened to more unity among all of us.
A simple wish from Archbishop Joseph Zeri. He's the leader of the Greek Catholics of Jerusalem, and he says there's a thirst here for unity.
It's a suffering, like I am suffering myself now. Of course, I'm Catholic today, but I'm really suffering in all my heart with this division.
That division dates back to the Great Schism of 1054, when the Church split into East and West, Orthodox and Roman Catholic. Greek Melkite Catholics were once Orthodox themselves, that is, until the 1700s, when they came back into communion with Rome. That's why Archbishop Zeri is hopeful right now. He calls Pope Francis' pilgrimage a ray of light. He was there 50 years ago as a seminarian when Pope Paul VI first opened up dialogue with the Orthodox. That big step towards unity took place in the Holy City.
These are the stones of Jerusalem. When they speak of Christians here, they speak of them as the living stones. This is the point of Pope Francis' trip. He's trying to promote Christian unity. And in this place, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, he'll be sharing in prayer with Orthodox patriarchs and Christian leaders on Sunday for that purpose.
A prayer is a prayer, and Jesus is present, and Jesus is risen from the dead. So Jesus is listening to our prayer. So praying to Jesus in asking him to unite us, to accomplish the unity among us. So Jesus will certainly listen.
And he says this historic trip will have a great impact on all Christians.
One church, unity of the church, is to help all over the world who are looking for happiness. No happiness except the peace and love and happiness given to all of us in Jesus Christ.
So, Brian, as well as promoting Christian unity, the Pope is also promoting interfaith dialogue. And as a concrete sign of this, he's got on the papal flight with him this weekend, he'll have a rabbi and also an Islamic leader, both from Argentina, both friends of his, and we'll see through this relationship with them that he's promoting dialogue and brotherhood himself.
Alan, can you give us a quick glimpse of the Pope's schedule?
Yes, the Pope will be here for 3 days. It's a packed schedule. He'll be coming in on Saturday to Jordan, where he'll be celebrating a Mass with the many Christians that are present there in Jordan. He's also going to be meeting with refugees while he's there. And that evening, he'll spend the night in Jordan. The next day, he's headed on to Bethlehem. He'll be celebrating Mass in Manger Square, which is right next to the Church of the Nativity, which is where Christ was born. He'll be there with the many Christians that are also present in the Palestinian territories. And then it's on to Jerusalem. And he'll be meeting here in the Holy Sepulchre, as you saw earlier, with Bartholomew I, who's an Orthodox patriarch, as well as other Orthodox patriarchs and Christian leaders. And from there, in the rest of the time that he's in Jerusalem, which is Monday as well, he'll be meeting with politicians here, church officials as well, and also the leaders of the Muslims and the Jews of the area. And we'll see some special moments as well when he meets with religious and seminarians. It's really going to be an incredible trip in which we'll see another side of Pope Francis among the people.
What a fascinating story, and we're so grateful you're covering it for us. What have you seen in terms of security there ahead of the trip?
In Israel, there are always a lot of checkpoints, so we see just the regular checkpoints. There doesn't seem to be any upgrade of security. We haven't had any problems all day going around with all of our equipment and filming. Haven't been stopped. We're not complaining, but ahead of the Pope's visit, we do expect all of this security to ramp up and there to be a lot more of these checkpoints throughout the city for the Pope's arrival.
All right, stay safe. Alan Holdren and our EWTN News team in Jerusalem tonight. Thank you, Alan. Alan and the EWTN News Nightly team are continuing our special coverage of the Pope's Holy Land trip. Of course, he reported tonight from Jerusalem's Old City, which is divided into 4 quarters. The winding streets are filled with shops and lead to many famous Christian sites, including the Tomb of Jesus and the Way of the Cross. The Pope will visit the Old City Sunday evening. Jerusalem is a city sacred to Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. Vatican Radio is reporting that for the first time in history, a Catholic cardinal has visited North Korea. Cardinal Andrew Yom Sejong, the Archbishop of Seoul, went to Kaesong Joint North-South Factory Park on Wednesday. He toured that complex and met South Koreans who work there. The Joint Industrial Park combines South Korean initiative, capital, and technology With inexpensive North Korean labor, it's the last remaining cross-border project between those rival Koreas. We'll look for some great guests on the world over with Raymond Arroyo tonight. Catholic author and EWTN host Stephen Ray and actor Stacy Keach join Raymond. Plus, His Eminence, Cardinal Luis Tagle, Archbishop of Manila, will talk about his work at the Extraordinary Synod of Bishops on the Family. Catch the world over with Raymond Arroyo, and if you miss it tonight, look for encore times at EWTN.com. Up next, it's music to the ears. Students orchestrate this professional concert and learn the value of creating harmony. And we'll check out this cutting-edge military technology displayed today at the Pentagon. On EWTN News Nightly for this Thursday evening, I'm Brian Patrick, and some of the world's most famous composers started when they were very young. Mozart and Mendelssohn are among them. And while this group of students may never reach that level, some professional musicians are making sure they get a good start. At this Colorado elementary school, students get their own private concert, one they helped orchestrate from start to finish.
We're doing a story about two princesses and two ninjas.
After plotting a story on paper,
Just only music to make a story.
the students use a piano or drums to plunk out the notes. Professional musicians write down the music, then play it in front of an audience. The Very Young Composers program was pioneered in Denver with the goal of bringing music, dance, and theater to children who might not otherwise attend performances. That as Denver's art community struggles for relevancy as demographics change.
I never think of it as highfalutin. I know other people do. I think everything that is made from nothing it comes from the earth. It comes from the ground.
The hands-on program has now spread to other schools across the U.S., as well as 8 countries.
A program like this can light a person on fire to be more involved as a listener.
And perhaps light a spark
Watch this, Monique. Look at this. All right, so we're going to start.
for a lifelong love of music. Well, Scott Jones and I love music. He joins us from the Arts Education Partnership here in Washington. Scott, what are the benefits of bringing music education to especially elementary school kids?
You know, it's amazing. We at the Arts Education Partnership have done a lot of research around the outcomes of arts education. We actually put together a clearinghouse of the database, a clearinghouse of research on arts education, and the many outcomes regarding cognitive development, regarding behavioral development, helping students to improve their learning across the subject. So it's not just learning in music, it's learning in reading, it's learning in math, it's learning how to be a better person in their classrooms, and it's helping them to become better engaged within the school.
So becoming a better person, so this really can impact behavior in the classroom, even in our culture?
It can absolutely impact the culture of the school. You know, it's one of those things where if you have a principal who understands the role that the arts can play, and particularly music can play within a school, it can change attendance, it can change behaviors within those schools. There's an example in Boston of a principal who actually got rid of a security guard position and hired an arts teacher so that they could bring in more arts to the community, and they didn't need the security guard anymore.
Do you see this collaboration between professional musicians and schools at all?
It's amazing the ecosystem of arts education in this country. You know, it's pulling people from the community and helping students engage in what it looks like outside of the school, helping them understand what careers can be when they leave their schooling.
Powerful, positive force. Scott Jones, thanks for being with us tonight. Well, here in D.C., the Pentagon does a show and tell of some of its most advanced research gadgets today. It's Iron Man with a twist, the capability to control a robotic arm with your own hand movements. This and other cutting-edge technologies were on display in the Pentagon courtyard. The DECA prosthetic arm can be controlled by the wearer's feet. A veteran using it says it allows wrist movement and gripping that helps him relearn how to live with both hands. EWTN News Nightly is now on 5 nights a week, so we'll see you tomorrow. Meantime, join us on Facebook and Twitter and catch us anytime on the YouTube page. For all of us, I'm Brian Patrick. Thanks for joining us tonight. Good night and God bless you.